So we reviewed the policy instruments which are intended to support innovation, especially innovation which arises through creativity and design as opposed to undertaking science and R&D activities. We were also interested in the extent to which policy instruments support creative industries, so industries like architecture, advertising, new media, computer games, etc. So innovation is constantly changing, and it's important that innovation policy and policymakers keep up. So the first industrial revolution, for example, was associated with entrepreneurs often acting alone, but establishing the factory system. The second industrial revolution was much more systemic. Henry Ford, the establishment of mass production, the development of scientific management. There was a third industrial revolution after the Second World War, especially associated with exploitation of science, so big science addressing big challenges like cancer, nuclear power, etc., etc. And associated with that industrial revolution was a very strong emphasis on research and development activities, especially undertaken in research and development labs, both within firms and within universities. Now, the question is, to what extent are these innovation policies still valid for the 21st century when we have quite a different form of industries and we have quite different, possibly different forms of innovation activities? The creative industries are highly innovative and highly dynamic. However, they undertake innovation in quite different ways from the orientation towards science-based activities and R&D, which is classic in the high-tech industries. They tend to be much more orientated towards improvised approaches to innovation rather than formalized approaches to innovation. So they're much more likely to engage in innovation through studio activities rather than laboratory activities. They tend to have a strong orientation also towards the creation of new markets. So in innovation studies, we tend to focus on the creation of new knowledge and the creation of new technologies, which are then incorporated into new products. But what we tend to overlook is the development of new markets and how markets are formed. So the creative industries really place interesting emphasis on this, how demand is created for innovations. Another interesting aspect of innovation in the creative industries is it's very strongly orientated towards networks. So often it's not based on individual companies working alone, but companies working through networks, through collaborative practices, but also individuals being brought into these collaborative practices, including consumers. So one of the perhaps most interesting things is in which production and consumption are becoming more blurred. So we're getting more and more active consumers engaged in innovative activities, particularly in the creative industries. So we need innovation policies to keep up with the changing nature of our economy. There is some danger that policy makers are kind of fighting the last war. They're orientated towards historical industries as opposed to new and emerging industries. So it's important that we keep up and understand how innovation is changing. So this means there's a need to review innovation policies and to keep them present. There's a strong orientation towards networks and networking. So one aspect here is how are networks formed, who gets to participate in networks, and who gets frozen out. So there's some danger that disadvantaged groups, for example, are frozen out of networks, whereas advantaged groups have strong access to them and may dominate them. So one aspect of innovation policy would be to look at access to networks, opportunities for all as opposed to opportunities for the few. We also need to think about how innovation is less about the development of new knowledge. So it's less about deepening knowledge. It's more about how we can find new combinations of knowledge. So rather than think that we need to extend and find new discoveries, what we need to do is put discoveries together. And this means more of an orientation towards bringing disciplines together. So more cross-disciplinary, interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary work may well be the way forward as opposed to deepening. So it's combinations as opposed to deepening.